Hello, my lovely rose garden. I mentioned making a long-form video on the basics of creative writing in a previous video. After all, what's AuthorTube without some writing advice? However, as I started scripting out the video, I realized that, well, it was just too long. I know that some viewers are totally fine with a 2+ hour long video, but I think it might have been a little more than my computer could render. So I broke the script out into parts and worked on making each section the best it can be. I mean the best. I did research for these videos, and I'll link my sources in the description. So let's start with the first one today. While I'm of the opinion that the plot, characters, and setting all work together to inform each other and are developed alongside each other, you've got to pick a place to begin. For this video series, I'm choosing plot as our starting line. So let's learn the basics of writing plots for fictional stories. When discussing creative writing, I often break the pieces of the story down into who, what, where/when, and why. Plot is the what of that equation. Specifically, what happens. What goal is the main character trying to accomplish? How do they try to achieve it? And do they succeed or fail? These questions serve not only as the basis of building a character arc, which we'll discuss in the next video, but also building the basis of the story's plot. When broken down to its barest essentials, the plot of a story is the initial conflict, the steps the characters take to resolve the conflict, and the result of their attempts. A simple plot may have only one conflict, one step taken to resolve the conflict, and then a straightforward solution. For example, many books for early readers and picture books feature simple cause and effect conflicts and resolutions, such as a child being bored on a rainy day, trying many activities to overcome said boredom, and ending by finding that they enjoy rainy days because they allow for so many different activities the child may not have thought of otherwise. Another example would be that a new student is nervous about their first day, is able to make friends at their new school, and ends the story feeling more confident about going back to school for their second day. When writing for older audiences, such as middle grade, young adult, new adult, and adult, it is common for the steps the characters take to resolve the initial conflict to lead to more conflicts, or reveal nuances to the original conflict. For example, the initial conflict may be a struggle over resources in a given region. When the characters take steps to resolve this conflict by invading the opposing side, they discover that their enemies aren't evil, but people trying to survive just like them. Now the characters are faced with an internal conflict that is not so easily resolved, and it will take more steps for them to come to a resolution. This can lead to subplots, which I'll talk about a little later. For now, let's go back to that term I just mentioned, internal conflict. There are several types of conflict that can occur in a story. These are grouped into two broad categories, external conflict and internal conflict. External and internal describe the source of the conflict. An external conflict comes from outside the character, while an internal conflict comes from a character's own emotions, mental state, or morals. Generally speaking, there are 7 types of conflicts. Character versus character, where two characters with different goals are coming into conflict with each other. This is seen most clearly with protagonist versus antagonist conflicts, but there are also subtler varieties. Consider the romance genre, where there may be no clear antagonist, but the two would-be lovers have conflicting goals and desires that stop them from being together until the end. This too is a form of character versus character conflict. Character versus society, where the character's goals, morals, or views conflict with those of society and create problems for the character to deal with. This can mean anything from the character being a criminal who's on the run from law enforcement, to an activist who is trying to change society for the better, to a teenager who is rebelling against their parents or school. Society in character versus society conflicts represents a collective, be that a literal society or a representation of social norms. Character versus nature, where the antagonizing force is literally the environment the character is in. This could take the form of a harsh landscape, a storm, or a dangerous animal. Isolation is common in these types of stories, but it is not required to introduce character versus nature conflicts into the story. Character versus technology, where the antagonizing force is based in technology. While it's often seen as a new type of conflict, character versus technology conflicts have been around for quite some time in human history. These stories usually revolve around the morality of technological and scientific advancement and the role of humanity within an increasingly technological landscape. There's a lot you can do with character versus technology, from Jurassic Park to Frankenstein and beyond. Character versus supernatural, where the antagonizing force is not rooted in nature or reality. This doesn't automatically mean monsters, though it absolutely can if you want it to. The supernatural is defined as anything that cannot be explained by logic and science, and does not occur naturally. So while having your character fight a werewolf qualifies as character versus supernatural for sure, so does having a character be trapped in a mysterious other dimension, or take a potion that turns them into an evil alter ego. Character versus fate, where the character is struggling against events that are preordained. Characters facing this kind of conflict are trying to assert their own free will against things like time loops that always end the same way, the meddling of the gods, and/or prophecies. While many stories featuring character versus fate conflicts end in tragedy, they don't have to. Who knows? Maybe it'll turn out this time. And lastly, character versus self is the quintessential internal conflict, where a character's greatest conflicts are their own personal flaws, expectations, desires, and/or morals. Let's take a look back at the previous example where I first mentioned internal conflict. Resources are limited, and the characters are trying to survive by defeating another group of people competing for the same resources. But the people they're fighting aren't evil as they've been told, they're just like them. Do the characters continue their hostility knowing they're hurting innocent people who are not unlike their own friends and family members? Or does this knowledge make them unable to act? Do they question their group's leadership, or do they charge ahead taking on an us-or-them mentality? All of these questions are part of the character's internal conflict in the situation, and must conquer themselves before they can take action, whatever that action is. If you've been paying especially good attention, you probably noticed that this previous example contains more than just character versus self-conflict. There's character versus character, the characters the reader is following and the people they're fighting. There's also character versus society, with the characters possibly questioning the leadership that led them to the fight in the first place. And there's character versus nature due to the scant resources. Complex stories like those found in middle grade, young adult, new adult, adult, and even some early reader books usually have more than one source of conflict, and these conflicts will overlap and develop over the course of the story as the characters take different actions to try to resolve them. And as one conflict is solved, it is possible for a new one to take its place, as the resolution may have unforeseen consequences. If you feel like your plot is stagnating, take a look and see where you can introduce a new source of conflict, or expand on one that's already there. Just like with different types of conflict, there are a few basic plot structures that almost all stories across the world can be sorted into. Let's take a look at them now. Overcoming the monster refers to stories where the protagonist must journey into the lair of the enemy, defeat it, and return. This can be a literal monster or a figurative one. Either way, the resolution to this plot is the defeat of the foe. The quest has the character embark on a quest, shocker, to find or obtain some kind of treasure. Unlike overcoming the monster, the goal of this plot type is to get some kind of reward, not defeat an enemy. Rags to Riches is the quintessential Cinderella story. The protagonist begins in a place of poverty or low status, and by the end achieves greatness. Voyage and Return is another spin on the journey story, where the protagonist explores a new world and then returns to the world they originally came from, transformed in some way by their experience. Depending on genre, New World can be literal or figurative. Rebirth is similar to the Voyage and Return plot in that the character makes a change, but they don't have to go on a journey to do so. Rather, an event forces them to change themselves in some way. Comedy refers not just to funny stories, but plots that end with the reunification of a community, often but not always through marriage. Tragedy, on the other hand, refers to a plot in which the protagonist falls from grace due to their fatal flaw. As with many aspects of literature, exactly which one of the 7 basic plots a story follows can be debated, and thanks to subplots, there may be elements or even whole instances of more than one basic plot in any given book. The basic plots themselves are broadly defined in order to apply to nearly all of literature across culture and time. Rather than approach writing with the goal of following one of the 7 basic plots, I think it's more beneficial to simply be aware of what they are. And of course, there is one more plot structure that I haven't talked about yet, which appears in almost every form of media with a 3-act structure. And that is the hero's journey, also called the monomyth. This is probably the most common story template used in modern media, though it has appeared throughout history and across cultures, just like the 7 basic plots. In fact, you'll probably recognize some of those basic plots within the hero's journey structure. I'm going to refer to the main character in this section as the hero, but as we'll cover in the next video, it's important to remember that the protagonist does not have to necessarily be morally righteous or good. Hero here simply refers to the primary character that the audience follows. The hero's journey is divided into 3 acts: the departure, the initiation, and the return, with 17 steps in total. The first act, departure, introduces the audience to the hero and their status quo. It's here that the audience is eased into the story and given a sense of how things work, who the key players are, and what they want. The steps involved in the departure are the call to adventure. The hero receives information or has an experience that challenges their status quo and pushes them toward the unknown. The refusal of the call. The hero rejects the call to adventure, often from a sense of duty or obligation, fear, or insecurity. If the hero is all in on the call to adventure, they may have the call refused for them by an authority figure. Supernatural aid. Once the hero is definitely set on the adventure, whether they want to be or not, they're usually given some kind of aid that will help them later in their journey. Crossing the first threshold. Up until this point, the hero has had the chance to turn back and return to their status quo. Once they cross the first threshold, this option is no longer available. The belly of the whale. This is the final representation of the hero being beyond the point of no return. From here on out, they will have to change and adapt to the unknown world in order to succeed and survive. It's a figurative death of their past self, and the following initiation act will encapsulate the formation of their new self. The second act, initiation, is the journey itself. The hero is now on their way and have their quest, so now they just have to actually do it. The steps involved in the initiation are the Road of Trials, a series of conflicts that the hero has to resolve in order to progress. These usually come in 3s, and the hero will usually fail at least once as they strive for growth. Meeting with the Helper. The hero receives another item that will help them on their journey. Temptation. The hero faces temptations that threaten to lead them from their journey or tempt them to stop growing as a person. Abyss. This is the culminating point of the journey, where the hero confronts whatever force initiated the journey. This is the center point of the journey. Everything before has been leading up to it, and everything that follows will be a direct result of what happens in this step. Apotheosis. The hero learns the key lesson that they have been working toward throughout their journey. This new knowledge prepares them for their rematch with the force of the abyss. The ultimate boon. The hero gets whatever it is they went on the quest to achieve. The enemy is defeated, the MacGuffin is acquired, and they're ready for the third act, Return, wherein the hero, returns to wherever they came from. The steps involved in the return are the refusal of the return. Just like with the refusal of the call, the hero may not want to depart from their new normal to get back to the world they came from, or may otherwise be unable to leave. However, it is important that they do in order to bestow their ultimate boon on the world that they came from. The magic flight. The hero may need to escape with the boon or otherwise find a way to leave the new world behind and get back to where they came from. Rescue from without. Just as the hero has outside help getting into the new world, they also have help getting back to their homeworld. The crossing of the return threshold. The hero crosses back over into the world they came from. Master of two worlds. Enriched by their journey, the hero now has the knowledge and experience required to be a master of both worlds they have inhabited. Figuratively, their physical and spiritual selves are now balanced. Freedom to live. The hero has their happily ever after, free to pursue whatever they desire and comfortable in their sense of self in a way they likely were not at the beginning of the journey. They've overcome their personality flaws and can live their best life. And now that you know this, you will never be able to watch any Hollywood movie without being immediately spoiled ever again. I'm sorry. Now, I mentioned subplots earlier, with the idea that the characters may try various approaches to resolve a conflict, and I think this is the perfect time to elaborate on them, since the employment of various subplots can help change things up and keep these stories fresh. A subplot is defined as a secondary or subordinate plot in relation to the main plot. That said, writing strong subplots can greatly improve a story by allowing additional space and time for characters to develop their arcs, for the world to be better fleshed out, and to simply allow for more time to pass to improve the pacing. Subplots add complexity and depth to a story. Remember though, subplots should support the main plot line, not upstage it. If you're finding that your subplot captures more attention and has even greater development overall than your main plot line, you might want to reevaluate which story deserves to be the main focus. If the plot is defined as the primary conflict and the actions the protagonist take to resolve that conflict, then subplots are anything the protagonist or other characters do that isn't that. And while the primary focus of the story will usually be the main plot, as it should be, adding subplots can give the reader greater incentive to care about the main plot because they'll understand the characters better and what's at stake if the primary conflict isn't resolved successfully. As with main plots, there are 7 key types of subplot. The isolated chunk presents a, isolated incident. While this subplot may have an impact on the character's mindset or reinforce the themes conveyed in the main plot, they are insular stories within stories. Think flashbacks, dream sequences, or the use of episodic storytelling common to many television shows. The parallel line subplot shows what other characters are doing in parallel to the main plot. As the name suggests, the events of these subplots may be influenced by the main plot, but the two plotlines almost never directly intersect except maybe at the very end. Parallel line subplots are especially effective when employing multiple perspective characters, such as a deuteragonist, who contrast with each other's experiences and worldviews. If you want your parallel line subplots to converge for a significant amount of time rather than right at the end or never, then you want a swallowtail subplot. Swallowtail subplots start out parallel but then fuse for a much longer period of time. Generally, a book employing a swallowtail subplot structure will start with one storyline, jump to the other seemingly parallel storyline, and build reader anticipation as the two plotlines come closer and closer to their convergence. The reader will try to work out how these two plotlines are going to merge and what the consequences will be, which can drive them to keep reading. The in and out subplot uses a revolving cast of characters to progress the main plot by having characters appear, do what is needed to advance the main plot, leave for a while, and then return again having had their own subplots and development that they bring back with them. This can allow the author to explore seemingly unrelated pieces of character and world building that aren't necessarily connected to the main plot but are still entertaining. The bookend is a common literary device wherein a book begins and ends with similar scenes, or a plot point other than the primary conflict, which is set up at the beginning and resolved at the very end. It's also a kind of subplot since it involves plot points outside of the primary conflict resolution. The bridge character is a type of subplot that uses a character to connect the main plot to plots that occur in other settings or to another series of events. Lastly, the clue is an especially important type of subplot for mystery writers. As you might expect, the clue is a kind of subplot that provides, well, clues to what's going to happen next, how to resolve the main conflict, and so on. An investigation will involve a series of clue subplots as the protagonist tries to uncover evidence, or cover up their crimes if you're writing from the criminal's point of view. While it may seem that plot is all about pre-made formulas, it's important to remember that the plot structures, basic plots, types of conflict, and types of subplots are all tools used to tell thousands upon thousands of unique stories. The what of storytelling is not more important than the how, and that's entirely dependent upon your own vision and storytelling. In the next part of this series, we'll talk all about the basics of writing characters, such as the difference between dynamic and static characters, how to craft a character arc, and character archetypes that may appear in your story. Thank you so much for joining me for this creative writing lesson. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe for more like this so you can catch the next part as soon as it's up, and check out the links in my description to my bookstore and website where you can find my books for sale, my Patreon to support my content, my bookshop.org affiliate link where you can purchase traditionally published books and still support independent bookstores, and of course my social media where you can keep up with all my content. Keep writing till next time, Rose Garden!